Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Vlox. Today we're going to go over the Affliction Warlock rotation guide for Season 4. And in this video, I'm going to go over the single target prio and rotation, as well as the AoE prio and rotation. I'll also go over the talent build that I'm using in M+, and why I'm using what I'm using. Before we get into all that though, please remember guys, like the video if you enjoyed it, or leave a comment down below and let me know, or subscribe for more content in the future. Thank you so much. Alright guys, so the first thing I'm going to do is go through the talent trees and go over some of the options you have available to you. So starting over on the class side of the tree, there are a couple options you have available to you in regards to stuff that you might want to change around. So the first one is probably going to be this node right here. In regards to this node, I like Coil over Howl of Terror just because Coil heals you and it's an extra stop, which you can target on whatever you want. Howl of Terror does not heal you. It is capped at 5 targets. And there's no real easy way to choose what this fears and what this doesn't fear, which doesn't make it very reliable. Honestly, just a worse Psychic Scream all around, though I generally prefer to go Coil. This option is not required. I take this because I do higher keys and harder content, so the extra DR helps a little bit. This node right here, you can take either of these options and probably be okay. I prefer to lower the cooldown on Dark Pact just because this is a pretty solid defensive and I like to have it up more often. This node you don't need, however, I like to take it because Shadow Fury is your only big stop in AoE and Men Plus outside of Coil and hard casting Fear. So lowering the cooldown on it I think is very valuable. And then other than that, everything else in the tree is pretty much something you're going to need at all times. If for whatever reason you don't want to take this, this, or this, some other options you have available to you are this talent here to make your Burning Rush do less damage to you and make you move faster. I personally don't ever feel like I need this. Honestly, the best thing about this would just be to lower the damage it does to you. But I haven't run into the issue where I feel like this does so much damage to you that you need this talent. Banish is another option for something like Incorp weeks. This allows you to basically solo Incorps by yourself with Banish and Fear. This is also useful for certain dungeons where you might want to CC like a boss ad. However, as far as this season goes, I'm not aware of anything you can use this on as far as boss ads go. And then Amplify Curse, this is useful in a couple dungeons just for the increased cast time on tongues. This would be in Dragonflight Hollow on the first boss for putting tongues on the boss that casts, which is Trick Totem. It's pretty useful in Knock It Offensive for the storm area ads that cast lots of storm bolts. Also pretty good in Ruby for Kokia for the elemental that does the cast. I guess I should mention this here as well. So while I do take sack in the spec side of the tree, I rarely ever use it. And the reason for that is you get more DR with your pet out, which is really, really important for high keys. I honestly don't even use this talent. I just use it for pathing to Soul Rot. However, if you do, for whatever reason, want to just use Grimoire of Sacrifice, I would highly recommend you take this talent right here, which is going to give you an extra 5% stamina while you have Sack active, which kind of offsets the loss of the DR. However, this Soul Link is still going to give you more overall damage reduction versus the extra 5% stamina you get from this. And you get to take 2 extra talent points. Alright guys, hopping over to the spec side of the tree now. So this is the build I'm pretty much running for 99% of the content. The only exception is with Doom Blossom, I will swap out to Dread Touch for certain parts of certain dungeons, which I will go over in a second. So with the build, you pretty much mainly only have 2 points that you could potentially flex out if you really wanted to, which would be Pandemic Invocation and Soul Swap. So the reason why I'm not taking these other talents here over Pandemic Invocation and Soul Swap is mainly because, first of all, you need one of these 3 talents just to be able to path down to Withering Bolt. So out of these 3 options here, Inevitable Demise is honestly not that great in my opinion. It has decent value on single target, not that great value in AoE. You do gain some AoE value with Soul Rot. Drain Life will cleave when you Soul Rot, But however, when you're doing your soul rot window, you mainly just want to be spamming either seed or rapture anyway. So I don't think this button fits really well into the rotation. Soul Flame is pretty decent in AoE. However, I'm mostly looking for stuff that boosts my single target and AoE at the same time if possible. And this just doesn't really provide any value on single target. Mostly the value from this talent is like funnel damage, like on the tree boss in Algathar Academy. With all the little plants that spawn, they explode and funnel damage onto the boss for you. Another place this might be good is like Brackenide Hollow after the first boss, where the trees constantly spawn lashers. Those will explode and give you funnel damage onto other targets. But this is 2 points, and I think there's just better stuff to take. So out of these three options, you're just pretty much just going to put the 1 point here. Now, while you're mostly taking Soul Swap just for pathing, it is actually pretty good for a couple dungeons and in a lot of scenarios. This basically allows you to swap your dots over to a new target without having to do the like 4 or 5 GCD setup by putting all your dots on it. So basically it's just useful anytime you need to target swap to something really fast. Like for example, the last boss in Brackenhide, when the totems spawn, this is very useful for getting all your dots onto a totem, so you can just start rapturing immediately. And basically what that looks like is you'll just have all your dots on the target. It does cost a soul shard, so just make sure you are aware of that. And then you soul swap onto a new target and you have all your dots there. And like I mentioned, that's useful in some dungeons like Algathar for the ancient branch on the tree boss that spawns. Since you need to burn down that branch as soon as possible. It's good on the first boss of Brackenhide for the totems or just getting your dots onto another boss. It's good for the totems on the last boss. It's good in Ruby Life Pools for Kokia with the elementals that spawn throughout the fight. It's good on Azure Blade in the Azure Vault for the ads that spawn. It's good for the ads that spawn on Granith in the Knockout Offensive. It's okay for Tira and Maruk just for swapping your dots onto the other boss. And then it's really good for Bromok in Oldemon for the totems that spawn that you need to kill ASAP. So it has a lot of value in a lot of these dungeons. I actually feel like I'd be kind of hindering myself by not having this like more often than not. And then with your other talent, you're pretty much just going to be taking Pandemic Invocation. I honestly feel like this is pretty much a lock-in just because it does help smooth out shard gen a decent bit. I do notice when I don't have this, like when I've tried playing without this, I'm just shard starved a lot more often than I normally would be, especially on single target, which is really, really bad since single target is our worst damage profile by far. So I'm a big fan of this talent. Basically what it does is it just makes you have a chance to gen more soul shards whenever you refresh your dots within the pandemic window, which you're going to be doing anyway, or you should be doing anyway. So it kind of just rewards good gameplay. So down here in this part of the tree, you could potentially swap out Tormented Crescendo if you wanted to. The reason why I like this is it's basically just free shards, and your shard spenders are going to do the vast majority of your damage. So I think this just has a lot of value. Really good for single target. It has value in AoE since you can use Rapture in AoE too. The other options aren't really the best in my opinion. Wrath doesn't highly have a lot of value on single target. Haunt is really good for single target but doesn't really have value in AoE. And then this you're just not going to take at all. So I think this is the best option out of those there. And then coming back to Doom Blossom, so like I mentioned, I do run this for the vast majority of the time on Fort and Tyran, just because this gives you so much AoE value that you're going to be losing a lot of AoE value and consequently time throughout the dungeon by not having this, even on Tyrannical. This is only going to save you probably like maybe 20 to 30 seconds at most on a boss, where this is going to save you a lot more time and on trash. However, there are points where I feel like Dread Touch is actually very good and very useful or almost required. So if we look at the dungeons, I think in Brackenhide Hollow after Treemouth, you pretty much need Dread Touch just to be able to kill the totems. So after we kill Treemouth, I'll swap over to Dread Touch, and this would be both on Fort and Tyrannical. I did do up to an 18 Fortified with this build right here, Brackenhide. And even with this, the totem still felt very, very hard to kill. So I think if I tried going into a 19, I might need to swap out for more single target somehow. But the reason you can pretty much make this swap in that area of the dungeon is just because there's not a lot of like super heavy trash pools after Treemouth. Over in this area, pretty much this is all just pad trash. It's pretty much just funnel for like the Shadow Priest. Like on this pool, for example, you only really have 4 main targets, which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, with a prio target, which might be like this guy since he has the most health. So Dread Touch is actually really good for that. Dread Touch is pretty much good in just situations where you have like a prio target you want to cleave with some extra targets on the side. So that would be like the same thing here. You have like 5 targets. Same thing here. You have like 6 targets with maybe like 1 or 2 prio targets. So it's not the worst running Dread Touch in this area of the dungeon. It feels a little better on Tyrannical versus Fort, just because the trash still does take a little bit of while. It's a little while to kill on Fort, but I don't think there's any way you can do this boss without Dread Touch, and I don't think there's really another time you can swap in this dungeon other than like right after this boss. This is like the ideal time to swap. If you're swapping after that, you're just going to be wasting time for the group, which more often than not you don't really have. Another dungeon this is really good for is in Ruby Life Pools after the first boss. So you'll see in Ruby Life Pools, a normal route might look something like this, or I guess as you go higher into keys, where you're going to be doing like really heavy AoE in the first area, and then once you go upstairs, you can't really pull big because these elementals just do too much damage. So you have a lot of like smaller target count pulls with a prio target with some cleave. So that's pretty much where Dread Touch shines in my opinion. So I'm in this dungeon on both Fort and Tyran also. I do like to swap to Dread Touch once you kill the first boss. Gives you a lot of extra damage for these elementals. Gives you a lot of extra damage for this boss, which is already a pretty hard boss for Aff, since there is a lot of target swapping constantly. Normally you might skip this bridge pull, so you come over here and you have a semi-big pull, but you should be mostly prioing down this guy that does the big AoE anyway. And then this last pull is just a prio target with some extra cleave. And then Dread Touch is also really good for the last boss. So I think in this whole area of the dungeon, Dread Touch is actually really good. And I swapped to it on both Fort and Tyran. And then I think that's the only 2 cases I would ever run Dread Touch in the dungeons. Alright guys, so now I'm going to go over the single target rotation and the prio list for single target. So on single target, your biggest priority is to apply and maintain your 4 dots, which are going to be Corruption, Unstable Affliction, Agony, and Siphon Life. Your 2 most important dots are UA and Agony. You do not want to let these fall off for whatever reason. Unstable Affliction has a lot of interactions with your kit and your talent tree, especially with Rapture, so you do not want to let this fall off for whatever reason. And then Agony is your second hardest hitting dot. It also has a ramp up time, so when you first apply this to the target, it does less damage, and then over time it'll start doing more and more damage. So if you let this fall off for whatever reason, you're going to be losing a lot of damage because this dot has to re-ramp again. And then an important thing to know with the dots is you want to be refreshing them during the pandemic window. The pandemic window is basically just the time when it's most efficient to refresh your dots, and the pandemic window is usually just going to be towards the end of your dots timer. So for example, if you see I have corruption here and it has a duration of 14 seconds, I'm going to wait until my corruption gets pretty close to running out, and then I'm going to refresh it like right about now, and that's pretty much the pandemic window. And like I said, you want to do that just because that's the time where it's most efficient to refresh your dot. You don't want to let your dot fall off completely, but you don't want to refresh it like when it has like 15 seconds left. And the other reason you want to do that is for the pandemic invocation talent. So after you have all your dots on the target, your next highest priority is to stack up Shadow's Embrace and maintain this debuff. So basically with this talent, whenever you drain soul, you will apply a stacking debuff to the target, which increases its damage taken from you. At max stacks, it gives you 9% extra damage. So you do want to make sure this is on the target at all times because you will be missing out on that 9% damage. After stacking up Shadow's Embrace, your next highest prio is to apply Vile Taint and Soul Rot together. You never want to use one of these abilities without the other. They have a shared cooldown of 30 seconds, so you always want to combine them. After you have Vile Taint and Soul Rot on the target, you want to use Dark Glare if it's up, as well as any on-use trinkets you have. After you use Dark Glare, you're pretty much just going to spam Raptures for a little bit until you run out of shards or you get close to running out of shards. And then once you hit that point, you're just going to be cruising and Drain Souling until you start regenning shards again, making sure you use any Tormented Crescendo procs that you get, which is this talent right here. Also, at any point, if you are going to cap on shards, you want to make sure you Rapture so that you don't cap on shards. And you're going to be doing that cycle of just Drain Soul and using your Tormented Crescendo procs until your Vile Taint and Soul Rot come back off cooldown, at which point you're going to use them again together and then just spam a bunch of Raptures, and then you'll just rinse and repeat from there. Alright guys, so now I'm going to do a quick demo of the single target rotation, where I'll just be doing the rotation and you can watch what I'm doing and follow along with the ability tracker. And then I'll go over that and explain it in more detail once I'm done. Alright guys, so now I'm going to talk through the rotation that I just did on single target. So we start out with UA, Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life. You want to try to get Agony on the target as soon as possible, just so you can have a chance to start genning shards. So as you can see right here, I already genned a shard not too long after I put Agony on the target. So I got all my dots up, I drained so I can apply Shadow's Embrace to 3 stacks. At that point, I use my Nimways. So if you are running this trinket, you need to use it before you use Dark Glare. Normally, if you have like a regular on-use trinket, like Spoils of Neltharis, you can just use it with your Dark Glare. But since you need to channel this, you just use it. You'd basically use it right after you apply your Shadow Embrace stacks, right before you use Vile Taint and Soul Rot. So I'm just using my trinket. I'll use Vile Taint, Soul Rot, and then Dark Glare. So at this point, all my dots are on the target. I have my debuff of Shadow's Embrace up. So my Rapture is doing the most amount of damage, and I'm just going to start dumping Raptures. Right there, I use a Nightfall proc just to refresh my Shadow's Embrace and try to fish for some Tormented Crescendo procs. And then we're just going to keep on dumping Raptures for a little while. So at this point, when I go down to one shard, basically that's when I start the cycle of just drain and then spending on Tormented Crescendo procs. Refreshing my dots within the pandemic window, and then we're just going to drain some more. You see I got a Nightfall proc, so I'm going to use it. Just refreshing my dots, using my Tormented Crescendo procs. So at this point I see my Vile Taint and Soul Rot are coming up, so I want to make sure I refresh Siphon Life and Corruption before I send these, so that I can just send these and start spamming Raptures and not have to worry about refreshing my dots. You don't have to manually refresh Agony because Vile Taint will do that for you. So I send those two again together, and now we just start spamming some Raptures again. Now that I'm out, I go back into my Drain Soul cycle, where I spend on Tormented Crescendo procs. I'm refreshing my dots. Back into Drain Soul, and we're just cruising and Drain Souling until these come back off cooldown. And that's pretty much it, guys. You just rinse and repeat the same thing over and over and over again. Alright guys, so there is one variation of the single target rotation, and it will change if you are playing Dread Touch. It will change very slightly. So with Dread Touch, you basically have one additional debuff you need to keep on the target at all times. So what this means is that you have to be a lot more careful with how you spend your Raptures, because this debuff will get applied through Malefic Rapture. So essentially you always want to have at least like one shard as backup to be able to apply Dread Touch in case it's going to fall off. But other than that, the rotation will remain the same. So now I'm going to go over a very quick demo of me doing single target rotation with Dread Touch on. Alright guys, so for the Dread Touch single target rotation, we're just going to go through a demo that I did, and I'll explain it. Just because the rotation's very, very similar outside of the one Dread Touch debuff. So you'll see here when I open up, it's pretty much exactly the same as you would open up without Dread Touch. You just put your dots on the target, you drain to 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace, use Nimways if you have it right here, Vile Taint Soul Rot, and then Dark Glare, dumping some Raptures. So you can see right here, this is the Dread Touch debuff. It's just another debuff that you have to track on the target. And I'm going to be watching this just to make sure it never falls off. I stop at 1 shard, and this is just going to be my backup shard in case I need to refresh this and I don't get Tormented Crescendo procs for whatever reason. So you'll see I have a proc right now and 2 shards, so I'll be able to refresh it no problem. Right now I'm just trying to catch my dots. And we caught the Dread Touch debuff. I'm just going to catch my dots and then keep on draining and spending on Tormented Crescendo procs. You'll see right there I did not have a Tormented Crescendo proc, so I hardcasted a Rapture just to refresh this debuff. At this point, my Vile Taint and Soul Rot are coming off cooldown, so I need to refresh Corruption and Siphon Life, and then I can just go into my Rapture dump. So here, right there, I did not just full send all the Raptures, because again, I'm trying to save to make sure I have this buff 100% uptime on this debuff. But yeah, you can pretty much see it's the same rotation more or less, guys. You just have to make sure you are tracking this and you don't let this fall off. But the core principles of the single target rotation are pretty much just the same. Alright guys, so now I'm going to go over the AoE rotation and the prio list for AoE. So in AoE, as you are approaching a pack, you want to start out by applying some agonies to start genning shards. You want to have the maximum amount of shards available for when you start dumping your seeds. So you can apply agony in one of two ways. You can either just manually apply some agonies, or you can apply agonies with Vile Taint. However, I would only do this if Dark Glare is available, because this dot does do a decent bit of damage, and you want to get that damage in your Soul Rot window as well as with the Dark Glare extension. So after you have some agonies on the targets, you want to apply UA to a prio target. I also like to apply Siphon Life. At that point, you do not need to drain soul to apply Shadow's Embrace. You could if you really wanted to min-max prio damage, but it is not absolutely required. You can apply a seed to just get corruption on everything. Once you do all that, you can finally send Vile Taint, Soul Rot, and then Dark Glare, and then just start dumping some seeds onto the targets. You pretty much seed until you run out of shards. Once you're out of shards, you're going to be drain souling, trying to fish for Tormented Crescendo procs for free Raptures. And then in between your draining and your Tormented Crescendo procs, you're just going to be catching your other dots. So you want to refresh UA. You want to refresh corruptions with Seed of Corruption. And then for agonies, you are going to need to manually tab to all the targets and refresh agony because Vile Taint will not be off cooldown fast enough. It is almost literally impossible to refresh every single agony, especially if you have a really big pull. But at the very least, try to make sure you get the agonies that are applied by like Vile Taint, because this dot does do a decent bit of damage, and letting this fall off will lower your AoE damage by quite a bit. Once your Vile Taint and Soul Rot come back off cooldown, you're just going to resend them, spam seeds, and then rinse and repeat. Alright guys, so now I'm going to do a quick AoE rotation demo, and then I will explain that demo in a little bit more detail after. Alright guys, now I'm going to go through a quick explanation of the demo for the AoE rotation. So you see here that I'm opening up with Vile Taint, and I'm doing that just to agonies on the targets. And I can also extend this with Dark Glare. I put UA and Siphon on a Prio target. This is just going to be the Prio target for this example. We send a seed just to put corruptions on the target. I'm going to use Nimways right here. You use Nimways in the same way you would the single target rotation right before Vile Taint and Soul Rot. But since I already sent Vile Taint, I'm just going to send it right here before Soul Rot. Then I send Soul Rot, Dark Glare, and we just start spamming some seeds. At this point, my dots are getting close to running out, so I'm going to refresh them manually. Drain Soul for fishing for Tormented Crescendo procs. At this point, my Vile Taint is off cooldown, but I'm going to hold it just to sync it back up with Soul Rot. So we send Vile Taint, Soul Rot again. Now we're going to start spamming some seeds. You do want to make sure you use your Tormented Crescendo procs and don't let them run out or expire. Dots are falling again, so we're going to refresh them. Back into Vile Taint, Soul Rot, and seed spam. Just over and over again. Once I get low on shards, that's when I kind of just start draining to fish for Tormented Crescendo procs. Because at that point, you're pretty much just trying to pull for your next big dump, which is going to be when your Vile Taint, Soul Rot's back off cooldown. And you just rinse and repeat over and over and over again. Alright guys, so there is a variation of the AoE rotation where you prioritize spending shards on Malefic Rapture instead of Seed. And this will mostly be like in very small target count pools, like maybe 3 or 4 targets, or you have like a really high health prio target that you need to focus down, or if you're playing like Dread Touch. So I'll show the prio list for that rotation right here. And then we're going to go through a demo of that rotation where I will just play through the rotation and then I'll go through an explanation of the demo a little bit slower and I'll explain what I'm doing. Alright guys, now I'm going to go through the demo and explain what I'm doing. So I start off with an agony just to start genning some shards. I put UA on the prio target. This is just going to be my prio target. Use a seed to get corruptions up. Put Siphon Life on the other 2 targets. We use Nimways same as you would on the single target right before Vile Taint and Soul Rot. So I use Nimways, then I send Vile Taint, Soul Rot, and Dark Glare. I use my Nightfall proc right there just to get Shadow's Embrace on the Prio target, and also potentially get some Tormented Crescendo procs, which I did not get any right there. So we just start spamming some Raptures. And then at this point, now that I'm out of shards, I'm just going to go into my drain cycle and pull it so I can pull some shards for the next dump. Using any Nightfall procs and Tormented Crescendo procs that I get. And then in between all that, I'm going to start redotting whatever falls off. So see here that my Siphon Lives are starting to run out, so I'm going to reapply those. I see my Corruptions and UA are about to fall off, so I'm going to reapply Corruption with the Seed. I'm going to reapply UA manually. Use my Nightfall proc. Have my Tormented Crescendo proc. These two Agonies were about to fall off, so I have to refresh them. They do manually refresh with Vile Taint, but Soul Rot wasn't available, so I just manually refreshed them. So you're going to see right here that my Siphon Lives are getting close to falling, but I can go right into my Vile Taint and Soul Rot window thanks to the tier set, because when you Rapture with the tier set buff, it extends your dots. So these technically this doesn't have 4 seconds, this has about like maybe 8 seconds left on it, which is more than enough time to get some Raptures off. You're going to see I start Rapturing and the timer goes up. At that point, I start refreshing manually. Refresh Seed as it's falling off. Refresh UA as it's falling off. Spend my Tormented Crescendo and Nightfall procs and just rinse and repeat over and over and over again. Here I definitely have to manually apply Agony because my Vile Taint's not up. My Vile Taint and Soul Rot are up, so I'm going to use them. Same thing with the Siphon Lives here. I can just extend them with Rapture. I got a pretty big dump off there, and then now I can just start refreshing dots. And you kind of just repeat that cycle over and over and over again. Alright guys, I think that concludes everything for the rotation guide for Affliction. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please let me know down below in the comments if you have any questions, and hopefully I can help answer them. If you guys did enjoy the video, please leave a like or a comment and let me know, or subscribe for more content in the future. Thanks so much guys, I'll see you in the next video.